pass over to the Chair, Sophie Hanford.
Kia ora te whānau. I would like to formally open our strategy. I'd like to adjourn our meeting until 2 p.m. And yeah, if we don't begin at 2 p.m, we will start within 30 minutes of that now hopefully moved time frame.
Thank you, Sophie. So we'll now
Welcome to our Strategy, Operations and Finance meeting, finally, as part of our day today, our pretty jam-packed day. Just to note too that this committee will soon have a Te Reo Māori name, so we'll be using that also in the future once it has that name. Welcome also to our mana whenua partner, Ngā Hawhua Ōtaki, Chris Tahiwi, and also to our community board members, most of whom haven't yet been officially appointed back to this committee, but are obviously welcome to sit at the table and look forward to hearing their input throughout the triennium. And yeah, first hui of this committee, so give me a bit of grace as we, even though it's a short agenda, but I might have to really instate standing orders if we get a bit unruly. But yeah, I'll pass over to Councillor or Deputy Mayor Kirby for our council blessing.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Whoa, how does that sound?
Oh. I don't know, Councillor Hanford's all good.
Your Honour, Madam, oh, what was the one? Yeah, I think it was Jocelyn yesterday called out the one. Yes, anyway, sorry. Back to our council blessing. E a mātou e whiriwhiri ana e nā take ke mua e o mātou aro. E pono ana mātou ka kaha taunu ke te whakapau mahara huapai mō nā hapori e mahi nei mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa kia whaihua kia tōtika tā mātou mahi ai o a mā te maia te tero whakamua me te hiri ka tia te arahi I roto I te kotahitanga me te aroha.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Kirby, and thank you for taking up that challenge and being willing to read our council blessing in Te Reo Māori. So on to item number 3, apologies. I've received apologies from the Ōtaki Community Board for a council related matter, and also the Mayor will have to leave just before 4 p.m. Do we need to move those apologies are noted, or we can, no, cool. Item number 4, declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. Haven't been made aware of any, perfect. Moving on to item number 5, public speaking time for items relating to the agenda. No one in the audience, so we are sweet. Members' business, leave of absence. Again, you can make the Mayor aware or myself as Chair if you're missing a specific strategy and ops meeting. Matters of an urgent nature. No. Okay, perfect. On to item number 7, He Kōrero, our updates. And first up, we've got an update, Strategy, Operations and Finance Work Programme. So I'll pass to Chris Pervan. And just to note, can we please save questions until the end of the update so we can just rattle through nice and efficiently.
Ati mani everyone. I've got a short overview just to update you on the development of our, when I say our, your work program. So we might go to the first slide. Excellent. So I started off just recapping at your meeting on the 24th of November. As you approved the governance structure, you set the responsibilities for this committee. Just to recap, for completeness, our focus is strategic, including things like strategies, plans, policies and bylaws, financial, so financial management, approval of contracts, financial policies and property purchases or sales. If you go to the next slide. And operational, so that will include things like the district plan and district plan changes, oversight of any shared service initiatives, through to signing off submissions to any external agency or body, and making recommendations to council on matters of interest to the to the committee. So I just wanted to give you that overview because when we talk about the work program, it will be in the context of those responsibilities. So what we're proposing to do is we're going to set out a full year work program, and I've said it's in development. And part of that development is going to be setting out an annual agenda, but also having quarterly items of interest. The proposal is that this is going to give you oversight of all the key governance issues and decisions that will be coming through. We had discussed at standing orders that if possible we would look to add items to the agenda, so that would help to minimise the need for notice for motion. Or of motion. So the idea is that you would be able to have input to the items that would come through on the agenda. I said we before. In reality, in the new year, I'm going to be doing a bit of a workshop with the chair and our deputy chair for this committee to just get some insight into those key areas. And I'll also be coming back in early February to test that we've got everything that you think is necessary before we bring it back to the table to be agreed. One of the important things will be getting the timing and sequence of what comes to this committee right, and also thinking about the linkages between our new subcommittees. So we obviously have a climate subcommittee and the social sustainability subcommittee, so we're going to have to look at how that all sort of flows together. So the reason I'm bringing it up is it won't just be for this committee that we're looking at our work program. And when we talk about work program, we're talking about the items that will be for discussion, engagement and decision. So what will come here? So just to reiterate, some of the items that come here will be strategic. It will be about our direction and review. Some of them will relate to the strategic priorities that you put on the table, would like to see in here. Some of them will be compliance related, so the things we just have to do, and some of them are going to relate to work that's already underway and is due to come back to this committee. That's it. I'll pause.
Cool, that's the end of the update. So any any questions from elected members? Councillor Coe.
Look, I just want to add to what Chris has outlined. And if you remember, when one of our very early meetings, we did a bit of a brain dump on the things we wanted to achieve at this triennium as elected members. And so we're going to pick up on that work. If you remember, Sophie did a really cool little diagram that set it all out. And I just really want to encourage all elected members to think about that question. What do you personally want to bring forward, into the next triennium? Things that were burning issues at the top of your mind when you completed your election campaign. We want to capture those and work with them and see if we can, build them into our work program. And then we won't have to have, as Chris says, we won't have to have notices of motion popping up, because the things that you want to address, that you have promised to your electorate, will be already in that program. So I just think this is a chance for us to change the way council operates. We know that in previous trienniums there has been a lack of strategic governance from elected members. Now is the chance to sort that out, and for us to really grab hold of this opportunity to drive strategic change in our community. And so I think it rests on all of our shoulders to really think carefully and think hard about where can we make a difference. What are the things that we picked up on when we went around talking to people? What are the things that we're picking up on as we continue to talk to people that need to be worked into that program? So cool. That's sort of my perspective on it.
Awesome, thanks for that comment. Did you have a question as well, or was it just mainly a statement?
No,
something
I just wanted to add to what Chris had
Deputy
said.
Chair.
Yeah,
and, cool.
So I just think, over the Christmas break, while you're lying on the beach or something with a cold drink in your hand, start pondering on that question.
And that diagram that we kind of all created together with those various strands kind of pulled into the one colourful circle that Liz is speaking of, that has been provided already to the team. And also really keen to see how we can get iwi input into that as well, and having that kōrero about that strategic direction being having that flavour in there too. So we'll definitely have those kōrero. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to sort of follow a bit on what Councillor Coe was saying, probably more in a formal way. So in this training we have 2 subcommittees, and I suppose referring back to the diagram, it's my understanding that those subcommittees feed up items to the Strategy, Ops and Finance Committee, but there doesn't necessarily seem to be any working with the chairs of those subcommittees.
Through you. I think we're at an early stage of developing, we're calling the work programs, because they were approved on the 24th of November. So I can see in my periphery my colleague Janice with her hand up. I think I was alluding to the fact that we will be working with the other committees, so I can confirm that. I think that the other subcommittees will not be held this side of Christmas, so it would be over the January period that would be connecting through for that work. Janice, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I've just heard Councillor Halliday saying not too early in January, so we'll do our best not to be knocking on your door on New Year's Day or anything like that. As Chris said, the 2 subcommittees are not meeting this side of Christmas, but that doesn't mean that we won't be wanting to have some conversations with chairs this side of Christmas, so that for the other committees we can start the process that Chris has underway here. Obviously, the governance structure that's in place for this triennium is a little deeper than the one that was in place for the last triennium, and that will change what I am currently calling, but need to find a much more accessible name for, which is the life cycle of a decision. So what we are working through at a staff level at the moment is, what does the new life cycle of a decision look like? So that's a process piece that sits alongside or underneath or over top of, depending on what it is, the other work that we're talking about here, which is building work programs and understanding what the, I guess, priority issues to come before the councils will be. So you can expect to see more of that when you come back from your break in the new year.
Cool, thank you, Janice. Did you have any more questions, Councillor Pravanov?
Yeah, so I just suppose I wanted to flag is that the Climate and Environment Subcommittee meets at the end of January. There's actually, it would be probably ideal to have some of those conversations before Christmas, because I'm actually away for a lot of January, and which I've applied for. So it's would be good to have these conversations earlier than later, if possible, please.
Cool. I'm sure that'll be noted by staff, and by myself too. Awesome. Mayor Holbrook.
Yeah, thank you. And really good to be setting the strategic direction of council, which we've traditionally done through the long-term plan process. I'm just wondering how this will kind of feed into and interact with the long-term plan process. I'm also aware that as we rebuild our strategic work program, the last long-term plan was inhibited in terms of strategic direction by COVID, and previously there's been a long period of interaction and engagement with the community to develop these strategic work programs, but just wondering how that might interact with such a process.
Really good point, Your Worship. What will be in the strategic direction component of our work program will be the long-term plan, and so part of that is going to include setting out the direction that will drop into the next long-term plan. I think we've been talking a bit about this year's annual plan, which is the last year of the current long-term plan. That will also be a feature in the work program. So we'll we'll have two concurrent processes running essentially to finish off the current long-term plan through the annual plan and to start the new one through the next long-term plan. So we will have an item on the agenda, and I'll note that our first meeting in the new year's in February. So we'll be looking to come to that February meeting with a bit of an overview of how we're proposing we might engage through that strategic direction piece of the long-term plan. So we'll be looking for your input and also how that would connect to things like reviews of strategies and other things that have been of previous conversation and interest through the induction period.
Thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just building a little bit on what Councillor Coe was talking to with regards to our visions, if you like, with regards to what we want to achieve, should we say, from a personal level throughout this triennium. But also tying it into your strategic priorities related to the four well-beings will be sought and included. So just for clarity from my end, so we're assuming we're just going to do a big dump of everything, and it pretty much will get spread then to the relevant committees to feed in the different ways that they need to do sort of scenario.
I think it will be an iterative process. My proposition is that we need to start somewhere. Our chair had forwarded me the work that's in draft around the four wellbeing, so that would be our starting position, I think, because we'd want to formalise that into the work program so we could ensure that we've got all the things that you want to discuss in that forward program. We'd then need to say, how does that link back to the other committees, and is there anything else that's been put forward by those subcommittees that also needs to be added in? So it'd be, I think, a two-way flow before we actually land it. So we will have to have a bit of discussion, and then the reality is as we get going through the year, I think we're calling them work programs, but they will be live because there'll be things that need to come onto the program, and there might be things that might have been expected in quarter one that shift to quarter two. So we'd continually come back and check in on that so that everybody, it's transparent and you've got a view of what's coming. So I think it was one of the things that we'd heard from all of you, that you wanted to be able to see that. And so as we get going, that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Any more partai on this update? No? Cool. Okay, thank you. And another update from the same team on positioning ourselves for reforms, so the Future for Local Government reform and the Resource Management Act reforms. So the team will be sharing this very much as an intro and a scene setter to more kōrero that will be had in the next kind of week or so, and then obviously early next year too. But yeah, so same as the last update, just hold your questions until the end.
Hi again. I just would like to introduce you to Joe Bryan, who's next to me. And I've also got Angela Bell, who will be joining the table slightly later. There's three things we're just going to step through in this update. The first is at the local government conference last week, we heard from the Minister for Local Government on reform. So we're just going to give you a bit of an update on the key points that came from that. Then we're going to just give you an overview of the Future for Local Government review, not reform, review that's in track. And we will be, as the Chair has mentioned, providing more information to you about the content of the draft report for that next week. And then following that, we're going to do a similar overview of the bill that's going through presently around the Resource Management Act and the proposed amendments. And we'll also just touch on our proposal to seek an extension to the timeframe for that. And also to note that you'll be getting more information about what's in those submissions next week. So this is if you like, the introduction. So, ministerial update. So the Minister for Local Government talked to us about how the reform package that's currently underway comes together as best she could. She focused a lot on communities and what the future for communities will look like. And government's focus is very much on the same environmental factors that we're focused on for our district, for Kapiti. Climate being the biggest threat from the government's perspective, the economic shocks, which we're obviously quite aware of. And they're very focused on the increase in conflict and crisis, which they're proposing is going to impact social cohesion nationally, regionally, and at a district and local level. So their proposition is what we are doing now is not going to be enough to respond to those things, that we're going to have to change and we need to future-proof our support for communities. So that's what the package of reforms is about. She talked about partnership being key, and she said to us, in her mind, partnership is definitely with iwi, but it is not where it stops. She said there needs to be far better cohesion and connection between business, iwi, central government and NGOs if we want to push through those environmental or sort of contextual factors, and if we're focused on improving wellbeing. The future for local government change is really an an opportunity of a generation, because it's about how we make a difference. And there's 3 focus points: place, people, and community. And the reform program is actually about getting proactive and responding to those factors that I mentioned above. The government actually wants to create more certainty. And so their view is by pushing legislative change through, operational change can flow behind it. And that until legislative change happens, the uncertainty will remain. The ministers acknowledge that they need to keep local leaders up to date, and they need to do a better job of that. And when they were talking about local leaders, they meant you. So they've got a commitment to actually getting better at that. So next page. And in that vein, a ministerial oversight group has been established. Its purpose is to provide greater visibility and connection across the reform package as a whole. And that package includes the health reforms, vocational education, the environment, the RMAs, the future for local government, and that's just to name a few. So you can imagine there's quite a few ministers getting around the table. They've met twice and they are meeting in December. I think it was interesting because the minister said, don't get too excited. We're in a storming phase, and I am quoting her. She said they need to get themselves sorted. So acknowledged that the sequence and timing of reforms that are currently underway need some work. And actually they need to better understand those linkages themselves. There's a desire for central government, I think, from ministerial perspective, to better understand the needs of local government and communities. So they've acknowledged they don't understand the impact of the reform suite as a whole on the ground, but they'd like to. They also acknowledge that the sheer magnitude of reform coming through is really driving further impact on capacity and capability issues, and acknowledge that central and local government are competing for staff to do the work, and that they want to do something about it. The solution's not on the table, but the intention to work on that is definitely there. So that's new information we didn't have, and I think a really nice umbrella for starting to talk about some of the reforms as they come through. And in that vein, I just really want to introduce the review into the future for local government first. I will just share what we're going to talk about. If we go to the next slide, Joe. So today, Joe's going to talk to you about process consultation, why change is necessary, and the recommendations and key messages. And I'm going to come back and talk to you about some thoughts from the panel. So at our conference last week, the panel was there, and they really shared what they're trying to get out and what they're interested to hear from you if we put a submission in to their draft report. I'll just hand over to Jo.
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. So the process for the panel that the panel is working through for the Future for Local Government review is on the slide there. This process has been underway for some time, a good year and a half, and can you hear me? In around about March this year, the panel actually visited council to hear feedback on their interim report. We're obviously now at the stage where submissions are due on the draft report in February next year. The timeline also indicates that, the next stage in the process will be for the final report to go to Cabinet, and then somewhere from that point a decision would need to be made, and it could be several years before legislative change actually occurs. So the bullet points there are just signalling where we're at in the process for this current submission. 13th of December we have an interactive workshop. It's mainly just going over what's in the report at the moment, the 257 odd pages, and what's actually in there. And we are hoping very much that we can engage with mana whenua early in the new year. Just waiting to confirm that. We are also hoping in late January to release some sort of media, just information pieces around some topics in the report, just to raise awareness of what's in there. And then, of course, the final submission will be coming back to you on the 9th of February. So one of the questions we had was, do we need to consult on this? The independent panel appointed by Local Government Minister Nai Mahuta is consulting with the public, and that includes local government. And anybody from the public can actually submit on the panel's report at the moment. The panel actually advised that they had not expected councillors to undertake community consultation on the draft report, given it's not their final report. And we have checked in with other councils within the region, and as far as we know, nobody is actually consulting. We're actually also working with Wellington City, Hutt City, Upper Hutt, Horowhenua, Masterton and Porirua City Council to sort of understand what the report means to them, and if we've got any alignments that we can be consistent in our submissions on. So I guess just signalling that there will be other opportunities, I'm sure, further down the track for, if it does hit reform. Obviously, it's still a review at this point in time, and we have an election looming. So what is the burning platform for change? The panel has signalled quite a number of issues here. One of them is needing to stop the unfunded mandates coming from central government. The impact of Three Waters and RMA and other reforms on council's role. So there's a lot of big change going on, and how is that impacting what we do and how we do it. They said that local election turnout wasn't great, although I did look at our numbers and they were actually better than they had been. Obviously, low trust just generally between central government and local government, and I guess Three Waters has been a part of that. Limited Māori representation across councils in general, and then they also felt that there was undervaluing of hapu iwi and Māori as a partner. And they acknowledged too that the wellbeing issue was too big for central government or local government on their own, that we need to be working together to achieve joint outcomes and co-investment. They also signalled some opportunities for centralisation, shared services or standardisation of services, and some of those include corporate sort of functions. So the report signals 5 key shifts, and I'll just talk about those really briefly in the interest of time. So strengthen local democracy, it's proposing there different models of participatory engagement with the community. That includes citizen juries and assemblies and more deliberative type models. It also talks about the elections and the model that we use, age, which I understand is a motion, the term of elections, 4 or 3 years, how elections are administered, and the role of the Electoral Commission going forward, and iwi representation. Building an authentic relationship with hapu, iwi and Māori. So there are proposals for statutory change relating to rangatiratanga and te ao Māori values. It's quite a lot. In fact, that's a very common theme throughout the entire report. Just about every set of recommendations has something along those lines. A much stronger focus on wellbeing in general, and it also talks about our role and whether we should be shifting from sort of infrastructure towards more social type functions around placemaking, being an anchor institution in terms of facilities that we offer, and more of a system networker type role. It also talks about more equitable funding, keeping rates as the base, but looking to central government for more funding help, and includes a climate change fund proposal. And last of all, a more genuine central government and local government partnership. So, yeah, how do we work together to achieve improvements in wellbeing overall? So there's some big cultural shifts and mindset shifts proposed in the report. And then moving forward, there's the 9 draft recommendations. I won't go through these. They pretty much signal what I've just covered. And there's quite a bit in each of these sets of recommendations that we'll be unpicking with in the workshop and with mana whenua as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. So back to me and thoughts from the panel. So before I get into this, I will say 2 things. When the Minister for Local Government shared her thoughts with us, my key takeaway for part of her conversation was no comment. And the reason I say that is because she didn't really want to share what she wanted to get out of the review or potential next steps for the future for local government, because she wanted to hear from the panel who was going to provide a report and then take next steps. The second thing I just wanted to say on that matter was that the panel was really clear that this government will not be doing anything with their report. It will be the next government that picks it up and decides what to do. So I thought that was a really interesting thing for them to start their conversation with. I just want to start off with, they started with the point that their view is local government needs to be retained and strengthened. So their review was not one about not having local government. So there had been conversation about whether that's what this review was about. So they were just clarifying that's not it. They talked a lot about the technological revolution that we face, the environmental change and eroding social cohesion. They talked about central government not being able to solve the issues that communities face alone, that local government needs to be at the heart of solving local solutions, and that their view was that local government is about building communities. It's going to be far beyond infrastructure into the future. They're focusing on mandate, commitment and the resourcing that's needed to do that. And their view is that there's a need to leverage purchasing power and relationships more than is happening today. They think new ways of working are needed, and Jo had just mentioned a number of ways that we may have citizens more involved in decision making going forward. They said that innovation underpins their design principles, and they viewed that partners would include utilising ideas like CCOs and other entities more into the future, because they thought that embedding economies of scale had to be a key outcome or focus going forward. They said local government would be an anchor role in the system, that part of our role would be about networking and essentially convening others to drive work related to health, housing, climate change, social cohesion and civil engagement. Their view is that the public management system is a barrier to central and local government working together, and that there is a cultural issue between local and central government that's it's broken and it needs to change. To be clear, it's not just about local government, it's also about central government. They think the funding for local government is insufficient. They said that our current model doesn't work, and it's not that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So rates will still be part of the local government model, but they're proposing that the unfunded mandate needs to be addressed through two mechanisms. One is through regulatory impact statements. So that's essentially when central government decides to put a change through, they're meant to assess the impact in a number of factors, and their view is the impact for local government has not been assessed or funded, and it needs to be. Secondly, they think that a new funding model from a central perspective is needed, so that it might be that 5% of central government tax take drops into local government. And the reason for that is because our rates-based model and sort of at a local government level really incentivises minimising rates increases for the community, which means sometimes we can't get to the things that need to be done. Joe had just mentioned before that part of that would be that there would be a separate fund for climate adaptation and mitigation. And that would sit outside this idea, so that actually there would be funding to address those issues, because their view was that that's going to be our biggest challenge going into the future. They said Te Ao Māori needs to be woven into everything we do. It's part of our identity and it should shape our world view. Part of that is that our legislation doesn't support us taking the steps we need to make that part of everyday life, and they're going to be recommending that it needs to. I think importantly, they said that their report won't change things, that people change things, and they said we don't need to wait actually. We could start doing some of these things now ahead of central government. I won't say they said dictating, but dictating what we actually do. And so, I mean, I'll just leave that sitting there, because I think they're trying to signal there's opportunity in this change. And I wanted to lift it up a bit. So we are going to talk to you about the detail, the almost 300-page report. But the panel said, guys, there's a report, but what we actually want to know from you is what are the big levers you think we need to be pulling and focused on? They want to hear what we think about, given that context, how do we embrace that change that is coming at community at pace? How do we address what's coming to us, what's going to be in front of us? Are they being bold enough? Where could they be bolder? What have they missed? Where's the blind spots? And they brought up amalgamation. They said they're not sure it's necessary. They used an example of Auckland as a case where it's made no difference at all to the improving well-being for the community. In fact, it's made it worse. So, and that's their view. They said they want some advice on that though, and they said, what should they be thinking about? Is it actually unitary models? Is it regional models, which again, they weren't convinced were working? Or is it local and combined models? So they really wanted some feedback on the big ticket items, maybe rather than getting into the page 149, take out the word extreme. They're not really looking for that feedback. So they wanted to be clear about that. And I think that's a really nice intro for where we might head with you over the next couple of months. So next steps. We are going to be unpacking that report with you next week. Just giving you some information about what is it. We do want to talk to our the iwi partners about engagement, and just to acknowledge this is not the last time we're going to have an opportunity to get involved. The panel's really clear. This is their report, and they're interested in the big levers, but it will be their advice going to Cabinet. They think the real opportunity for consultation is post government decision if reforms are kicked off. So we will be coming back to the 9th of February Strategy and Ops and Finance meeting to discuss the submission and be looking to come back, as Joe said, to submit by the end of the month. I'll pause. The next thing we're just going to give you an overview of is the resource management reforms. Two parts to that: Natural and Built Environment Bill and the Spatial Planning Bill. These are going through at pace. You'll no doubt have seen them in the media. We, in the course of this presentation, are going to talk to you about an intention to seek an extension to our submission. It's technically due at the end of January. Local Government NZ has put a submission in already, seeking an extension towards the end of February, and they are encouraging councils to also seek the same extension. I will just pass over to Angela Bell, and she'll take you through the rest of the presentation.
Kia ora koutou. Appreciate it's very late in the day, so I'll try and make this as brief as possible. But having said that, Resource Management Act 1991 is the primary piece of legislation that's been looking after our resource management in New Zealand for the past 30 years. It covers air, soil, freshwater, coastal environment, as well as land use. This is what we currently work under. The government commissioned the Randerson Report, which was released in July 2020, which made a number of recommendations for fairly substantial system reform. And in February 2021, the government announced that they would indeed be repealing the RMA and replacing it with 3 separate pieces of legislation. So those are the Spatial Planning Act, the Natural and Built Environment Act, and the Climate Adaptation Act. In July 2021, the government released an exposure draft of the parts of the Natural and Built Environment Bill that were intended to replace Part 2 of the RMA, which is the Purpose and Principles section, for those of you who might be aware. This is a very small section of the overall suite of legislation, but is also a very important section. Council submitted on that exposure draft to the select committee that was considering it. And then from that point, you roll on to last month, when the government introduced the 2 pieces of legislation into the House. So the 15th of November was the day that councils got to see the full extent of what was being proposed in the reforms for the first time, with the exception of what was in the exposure draft much earlier. Those 2 bills were introduced, have had their first reading, and then have been sent through to the Environment Select Committee for consideration. So just a brief recap on select committees. They are made up with MPs from across the House. The Environment Select Committee is chaired by Eugenie Sage. It's expected that pieces of legislation normally take about 6 months to get through select committee and reported back to the House. And a major part of a select committee's consideration of bills is to invite public submissions, primarily written, but there are also usually opportunities to submit orally on submissions as well. And at that point, you can be questioned by members of the committee for further information and things like that. They decide whether to recommend that the House pass a bill, and they can also recommend amendments as they go through that process. And so there are 2 bills in front of the House, in front of Select Committee at the moment. The Climate Adaptation Act or bill is expected to be introduced next year sometime, so that one's running on a slightly slower time frame than the other 2 that we are seeing. So we're now firmly in the legislative process, and the Select Committee has opened for submissions. However, the time frame that Select Committee has allowed us is quite tight. So 30th of January is when submissions are due, and obviously that is right over the Christmas period, which is a challenge for staff, but also for our iwi partners and for everyone else who is rushing to understand nearly 900 pages of legislation and how that might impact on council and our business and our communities. So it's a big challenge. As Chris said, Taitora and LGNZ have written to seek an extension until the 20th of February, and we're currently in the process of drafting up a letter to do the same. We have no idea whether that will get through or not. So as it stands, we're still working to that 30th of January deadline and crossing our fingers that maybe we'll have a bit more time on the other side of Christmas to see what happens. So moving on from the process, I've got a very high level diagram. I know the text is tiny, you really don't need to read it. So this is the current process under the RMA for general business. So there's national direction that is provided by central government, and that is in the form of national policy statements and environmental standards. That's the top level of direction that we get. It then rolls down to the regional level where they can issue regional policy statements, which other plans need to give effect to. And below that are regional plans and district plans. There are, well, I guess we can currently say there's one regional plan. They tend to have, sometimes they have many, sometimes there's one. And we have a single district plan. So across a region, there are multiple plans that sit in place. Underneath that, we have a consenting system that our consents team at the council and at the regional council look after. And we also have monitoring, compliance and enforcement functions where we can take action if people are in breach of plans and resource consents and those types of things. So that's the general process that we go through at the moment. District plans are written by TAs, regional plans are written by the regional council, and as you might expect from their names. But the new system, I don't know why they made the diagram flow differently, but it is still kind of different. We now have what is proposed in the top left corner as a national planning framework. So this is it will combine all of the national direction that we currently have in the form of policy statements and environmental standards into one document, I guess, or one framework, and it's also intended to include some new pieces of direction that we haven't had around natural hazards and infrastructure as well. So the government is required to put a national planning framework in place, and all councils are required to basically give effect to that through their underlying planning documents. The next piece that fits in the puzzle in the new system is new. So this is the regional spatial strategies, and they're going to be enabled by the Spatial Planning Act. These regional spatial strategies are, they kind of bring together all of the vision for a region and how it wants to grow and develop over a relatively long time frame of a minimum of 30 years. It brings in infrastructure planning as well as other growth planning aspects as well. For those of you who might be familiar with the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, they have a regional growth strategy, and it's kind of similar to what you might expect to see in a growth strategy, but under a slightly different name. And there is also a future development strategy that the leadership committee will have to do, which is again kind of some of the same things that you might see. We're still figuring out how that will exactly play out together. So regional spatial strategies will be decided by a regional leadership committee. This is a bit that you guys are likely to be quite interested in. It is a new committee that is formed between all councils in a region and iwi partners, and for the regional spatial strategy can also have an appointee by a minister. They are independent committees who have the ability to make decisions on behalf of all of the councils. So they decide on the regional spatial strategy, and then underneath that are natural and built environment plans which have to give effect to the regional spatial strategy. There will be one of these plans per region, so this incorporates what is currently in all of the regional plans as well as all of the district plans in the region all come together into one natural and built environment plan. Again, we're still kind of figuring out exactly how that the production of that will work. However, the decisions on that plan again are made by that regional planning committee, whereas currently councils are making decisions on their own plans. This is going to be rolled up and decisions will be made by the regional planning committee. Once you've got those plans in place, the consenting and compliance enforcement and monitoring systems still sit underneath them and are still relatively the same. There's a few tweaks in the consent systems, a few changes to some enforcement provisions, which will hopefully encourage better compliance with resource management consents and other things. But the consent system and the monitoring stuff is largely the same as what you have today, with a few little tweaks in place. So that's kind of the really, really high level. As I said, there's a regional planning committee. In a slightly technical level, we're moving from an effects-based system to an outcome-based system. It's kind of a bit of planning jargon, but it does make a difference to the way people make decisions and whether you are managing the effects of an activity, or if you're assessing whether an activity is going to achieve the overall outcomes that you're seeking to achieve in the plan. There is a significantly enhanced role for iwi across the resource management system, including appointments to the regional planning committees, and there's a few other things that we'll get into next week around some of the systems that sit around that for our iwi partners. And there are also, as I noted, some new and enhanced enforcement tools that might make things a bit easier to get compliance on some of our issues. You're going to speak to this one, aren't you, Chris?
Yep. The process for our submission, it's looking a little similar to the one for the Future for Local Government submission, because they are tracking to the same time frame. So at this stage, we're talking to you next week about the 900 pages of material that I know you're wanting to get into. So the key information from that, just so you can see what's sitting in there. And I think one of the things that I do want to say at this stage is the two systems and how they looked just up there. The change is not immediate with any of these things. I think through induction, we showed you an A3 that the local government commissions put together that sets out when will change actually happen from these things. And in fact, Local Government New Zealand actually talked to a select committee about 3 weeks ago around about this, and said that their view of impacts for long-term plans were that we really weren't going to see a huge amount of change until the 25 to 27 period, because there's a lot of water to go under the bridge. And they also highlighted that we would have whatever form it is, a new government next year, and who knows what will happen with some of the stuff. So at the moment, we are engaged and we're submitting and we're planning. So I just want to make sure I say that to you. But the 20th of December, we're going to be shooting a letter to select committees seeking extension to the end of February. We'll be coming back to you in January, your first council meeting, with proposed draft submission, unless we get the extension, in which case we might try and push that out to February. At this stage, we're aiming to hit the 30th of January submission deadline. And just to acknowledge that a huge amount of work is currently underway within the organisation, within KCDC, to get across that 900-page document and ensure that we can give you good advice and unpack that for when we do come back to you in January. That's me.
Thank you, not only for the update, but for the, as you're saying, the myriad of hours that would be spent diving into all of the different review and reform programs, and then the tight timeframes as well that flow on from that. So any questions for Chris, Angela and Joe? Yeah, Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair. Perhaps where do you start with this one? Okay, so generally the government's done exactly the same to us that they did 2 years ago with the Three Waters reform, which was to give us substantial questions over the Christmas period after a busy year. Is that right?
Yes.
That sucks. Look, I'm just going to take it right back to the beginning, and I don't have much to say, to be honest, but in my opinion, the third point said there, central government needs to understand and respect. To me, central government needs to understand and respect local government And I think that's pretty much for the biggest problem here. I still don't think central government has a clue in that space. I know that they've said that they will try to get an understanding, but any submissions that we're doing to that, I think that needs to be highlighted. It's just to improve wellbeing, but they've screwed it up, and they're now moving on to us to fix, in my opinion. We need to keep local leaders up to date. After saying that, that's them speaking at us again and not with us. And so just completely and utterly undermined everything that they said previously to that, in my opinion. They say here there's an understanding by ministers to get an understanding of local government. Well, they need to start actually having some really respectful dialogue with us and start working with us. That's just my opinion with regards to that. Other than that, I look forward to reading the report in January, hopefully February. Yeah, right.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday, and also just to welcome Huriwai Paki, who's joined us via Zoom. Kia ora Huriwai from Ngāti Rangatira, and if you have any pātai as well, just feel free to raise your hand and we'll be able to accommodate you via Zoom. Thanks for joining us. Kim Tahiwi.
Kia ora. Thanks for that. I had to get my head around that 900-page document. But as I'm listening to you, and there's a question at the end of this, what occurs to me is that the critical point is actually getting the information to be able to do all this work. So there's a trend towards place-based governance decisions. This trend's been happening for a while. So everyone wants to use local connectors and all that kind of stuff, and that's what we're tending towards. Then there's also the time frames that we're always given. So my question is around meaningful engagement, because to me that's the key. If we can get that right and have a steady flow of information occurring between iwi, between the community, between the governance, then that makes all of this a lot easier. But I suppose my question is, what is the measure of meaningful engagement and who decides on that measure? Because historically in the past, you have all heard comments about they don't engage, and then you'll come to the other side of the coin and yes, we did engage. So there's obviously a miscommunication going on there between what actually is meaningful engagement. Do we decide what it is? Does the e-news decide what it is? So everyone has to feel comfortable that they've been engaged with. Understandably, we can't please everyone all the time, but is there any work being done around this? Because that is the key information highway, if you like, that we need to pinpoint down so that we can do this stuff and give submissions that reflect what the community wants.
That is a really good question, Kim. I think that might need to be part of our feedback in our submission to both, to be fair, because when you're given 2 months over Christmas to submit on really substantive change, it really does make it difficult to even say, what does meaningful engagement look like in that context? So I actually think that the Future for Local Government panel really wanted some feedback around things like what is good engagement linked into the democratic process, actually. So they really wanted to hear back on that. And I think the point you're making is that includes on significant change led at a national level and a regional level, not just what's happening at, in our local community. So I think we could pick that up as a point to note now, so that we come back to it when we talk about our draft submission.
Did you have any other parts, Kim, or no? Just that one. Cool. Councillor Cooper.
I just had a question for Kim, actually, if that's all right.
If you're happy to
okay,
answer. If you're happy to answer a question, yeah.
Meaningful engagement. Cool. Do you think it's a case of we're trying to stuff a Māori worldview into a Westminster non-European, non-Māori parcel? So can in terms of that, can it ever actually they coexist to the happiness of both parties? It's sort of like a big question, I suppose, isn't it?
Big question. Sort of thinking yeah, wow. How much can you achieve?
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So my initial reaction is that at the end of the day, we are people first. And our focus is on making a better place to live. So making our land sustainable, making our environment sustainable, and making sure that our people are happy, living good well-being, living happily, living healthily. So if we focus on that bigger picture, I think we can fit them into the same system. The vehicles we use to get there, to that objective, will obviously be different. And I think they can coexist. But I think it goes wider than that. It goes to the community at large. Everyone's feeling that. You add in COVID, you add in all these things. People are feeling it. They're feeling not listened to, even when they are listened to. But there's just this underlying thing that government is not listening. And if we can get that sorted and actually get some and be going to the people on the ground and giving them the confidence that they are being heard, I think Te Ao Māori and all these things fit side by side. It may not be in this model because this is kind of a historical model. That model needs to be changed, but the overarching objective, you'll find, is exactly the same.
Awesome. Good question and even better answer. Thanks, Kim. Real good. So any other questions before we move on? Yeah, let's just keep moving. No other lights. Okay. Thank you so much, Chris, and Joe, who's I think up at the back there. Thank you. Perfect. So Robbie and Ninka, you're up. So we've got a report now on, a report seeking a formal decision to review the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2017. So I'll let Robbie introduce the report, or Ninka, or whoever.
So Madam Chair, could I just chip in and ask if we could have those reports circulated to us on the hub?
Yes.
Because I don't think they have been.
Yeah, no, we will.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, they're there now. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, DEM Services. And we'll hold. Oh yeah, we'll let you introduce the report. Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. So we're just seeking a formal decision to agree to proceed with the development of the new Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan. So this is just the procedural decision to give evidence to MFE that we're undertaking this work. So early next year there will be plenty of opportunities to get involved. There's a series of workshops planned for workshops, public consultation, and yeah. So this isn't the plan as such, it's the decision to proceed with developing it.
Great. Any questions from elected members? Yeah, Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair, just clarifying, if we don't go with option A, we lose funding, is that correct?
Yes, from January.
Can I, I'm happy to move this motion, Madam Chair.
Cool. Any other questions before we... No? Cool. Can I have a seconder for that? Awesome. Seconded by Councillor Pravanov. Right of intro?
Waived.
Perfect. Any debate on the recommendations in front of us? No? Perfect. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Perfect. So now
And Madam Chair, I just want to say, taking nothing away from the fact that the reports and everything have been done and you've been here to present to us, but to me that was an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah. Completely agree. And yeah. Perfect. Thank you for preparing the report and being here. And thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Ninka. Perfect. Item number 9, public speaking time. For items not on the agenda, there are no public speakers. Confirmation of public excluded minutes, there are none. So that concludes our Strategy, Operations and Finance Committee meeting. Woo. Thanks. Whoa.